The 15th of April, 1945, a veteran German Luftwaffe pilot, climbing desperately toward 30,000 feet, suddenly froze in terror. Above him flew a massive American bomber that shouldn't have been able to exist, let alone fly at an altitude his fighter could never reach. In that moment, staring up at the gleaming silver B-29 Superfortress, cruising effortlessly through thin air, while his own engine screamed and sputtered, he realized everything the Nazi propaganda machine had told him about American technological inferiority was a devastating lie. But how had an entire nation's military leadership become so catastrophically blind to their enemy's true capabilities? The 15th of April, 1945. The morning sun cast long shadows across the German countryside as Hauptmann Klaus Weber pulled his leather flying gloves tight and walked toward his Messerschmitt Bf 109. The war had been going badly for months now. Fuel was so scarce that pilots got maybe one flight per week if they were lucky. Most of the experienced pilots were dead or missing. The new recruits were boys, some barely 18, with only a few hours of training before being thrown into combat. Weber had been flying for 4 years now. He remembered the early days when the Luftwaffe seemed invincible, when German engineering was the best in the world. His Messerschmitt could climb to about 25,000 feet on a good day, maybe 27,000 if he pushed it hard. That used to be enough. Allied bombers flew lower then, and German fighters could reach them easily. But something has changed in recent months. Reports came in from radar stations about massive aircraft formations flying at impossible heights. The radar operators called them ghost signals at first. No plane could fly that high, they said. The air was too thin. The cold would freeze engines solid. Pilots would pass out from lack of oxygen. The German war machine was falling apart. Synthetic fuel plants were being bombed daily. The Ruhr Valley's industrial heart lay in ruins. Cities burned while radio broadcasts still promised miracle weapons that would turn the war around. Food was scarce. People whispered about defeat, though speaking such thoughts aloud could mean death. Weber's own squadron had lost 12 pilots in the past month. Replacement aircraft were built with cheap materials that cracked in the cold. Spare parts came from crashed planes. His radio worked only half the time. The oxygen system leaked, making high-altitude flights dangerous. On this particular morning, the radar station crackled to life with an urgent message. Massive formations detected at 30,000 feet, heading east toward Berlin. Weber and 3 other pilots scrambled their fighters, engines coughing to life on the precious fuel. As they climbed, Weber watched his altimeter needle creep upward. At 20,000 feet, his breath began fogging the canopy. At 25,000 feet, his engine started struggling in the thin air. His head felt light from the poor oxygen supply. The other 3 planes fell behind, their pilots unable to climb higher. At 28,000 feet, Weber's engine was screaming. Ice crystals formed on his windscreen. His hand shook from the cold despite his thick gloves. Then he saw them. Far above, like silver dots against the blue sky, were the largest aircraft he had ever seen. They moved with impossible ease at an altitude his fighter could never reach. Weber stared upward in stunned silence. These weren't the familiar British Lancasters or American B-17 seconds he knew. These were something entirely new. Something that shouldn't exist. At that moment, everything he believed about German technological superiority began to crumble. Weber pushed his throttle forward, desperate to get closer. His Messerschmitt groaned and shuddered as it fought against the thin air. The engine temperature gauge climbed into the red zone. Ice formed thick on his wings. At 29,000 feet, his maximum ceiling, he was still thousands of feet below the massive bombers. Through his binoculars, Weber could see details that made his heart sink. These aircraft were enormous, easily twice the size of any bomber he had encountered. Their silver skin gleamed in the sunlight. 4 massive engines powered each plane, bigger than anything German factories were producing. The bombers flew in perfect formation, steady as rocks in the violent high-altitude winds that were tossing his fighter around like a toy. What shocked him most were the gun turrets. They moved on their own, tracking targets without human hands touching them. Remote control, Weber realized. The Americans had built robots to defend their bombers. His own aircraft still used manual gun sights and hand-cranked mechanisms that his grandfather might have recognized. Weber tried his radio, hoping to coordinate with the other fighters. Static filled his headset. The American bombers were equipped with communication systems that worked perfectly at this altitude, while German radios failed in the thin air. He watched helplessly as the formation adjusted course with precision that spoke of advanced navigation equipment his Air Force could only dream about. The contrast was crushing. Weber's cockpit was unpressurized and freezing. His oxygen mask leaked, making him dizzy. His instruments were fogging over. Meanwhile, the American crews above him were sitting in heated, pressurized cabins, breathing normally, probably drinking hot coffee while they prepared to destroy German cities. Intelligence reports had mentioned these new bombers. The Americans called them B-29 Superfortresses. They could fly 4,000 miles without refueling. Weber's fighter had a range of barely 400 miles. They carried 20,000 pounds of bombs. His plane carried 2 small cannons and maybe 200 rounds of ammunition. They cruised comfortably at 31,000 feet. He was struggling to breathe at 29,000. The numbers told a story that Nazi propaganda had hidden from the German people. American factories were producing these technological marvels by the thousands. German production lines could barely keep up with replacement parts for existing aircraft. The Americans had pressurized cockpits, advanced radar, automatic systems, and unlimited fuel. German pilots flew patched-together fighters with leaking oxygen systems and empty fuel tanks. Weber's engine began to sputter. The thin air and extreme cold were taking their toll. He had to descend or risk crashing. As he turned away from the unreachable bombers, a terrible thought crept into his mind. If the Americans could build machines like this, what else did they have that German intelligence knew nothing about? The war was not just going badly. The war was already over, and nobody had told the German people. Weber descended slowly, his mind racing faster than his sputtering engine. The silver bombers disappeared into the distance, untouchable and unstoppable. In his cramped, freezing cockpit, he began to understand something that shattered everything he had believed for 4 years of war. The Nazi newspapers had called Americans lazy and stupid. The radio broadcasts mocked their industrial capacity. German officers laughed about American soldiers who needed ice cream and hot showers. Weber had believed it all. Every German pilot had believed it. But the evidence floating miles above his head told a different story entirely. How could a lazy, backward nation build machines that made German engineering look primitive? How could stupid people create remote-controlled gun systems while Germany still used manual cranks? The Americans had not just caught up with German technology. They had leaped so far ahead that German fighters could not even reach them to fight. Weber's hand shook as he wrote in his flight log. The words came slowly, each one heavy with terrible realization. Enemy aircraft observed at 30,000 feet, unable to intercept. Technology far superior to our own. He paused, pen hovering over paper. What he wanted to write next felt like treason, but the truth burned in his chest. We have been lied to about American capabilities. Our intelligence is completely wrong. The enemy is not inferior. They are years ahead of us in every way. The cockpit felt smaller now, more like a coffin than a fighter plane. Weber remembered all the propaganda films showing German scientists and engineers as the world's finest minds. He thought about the speeches promising miracle weapons that would turn the tide. All lies, all of it lies. If the Americans could build bombers like the ones he had just seen, what else could they build? How many thousands of these super bombers were rolling off American assembly lines while German factories struggled to produce a few dozen outdated fighters? The math was simple and terrifying. Germany was not losing because of bad luck or betrayal. Germany was losing because the enemy was simply better. Weber's worldview collapsed like a house of cards. The master race theory, the technological superiority, the inevitable victory, all propaganda built on wishful thinking rather than facts. He had risked his life daily fighting for a cause that was doomed from the start by leaders who either did not know the truth or refused to accept it. The American bombers were probably over Berlin by now, dropping their massive bomb loads with precision guidance systems while German anti-aircraft guns fired blindly into empty sky. The war was not just lost. It had been lost long before anyone realized how completely outmatched Germany really was. As Weber landed his battered fighter, he knew he would never again trust his commander's promises or his nation's propaganda. The Silver Bombers had taught him that truth was more dangerous than enemy fire. The 8th of May, 1945. The war ended 3 weeks after Weber's encounter with the Silver Bombers. He survived the final chaotic days when fuel ran out completely and the Luftwaffe ceased to exist. Walking home through the rubble of what used to be Munich, he carried only a small duffel bag and the flight log that contained his terrible discovery. Germany lay in ruins. Cities were piles of broken concrete and twisted metal. Hungry children begged for food from American soldiers who handed out chocolate bars and canned meat. Weber watched German engineers and scientists lining up to work for the occupying forces, eager to learn about the technology that had defeated them so completely. At the local airfield, American mechanics were examining captured German aircraft. Weber approached them cautiously, his English halting but understandable. He wanted to see a B-29 up close. The American sergeant, a friendly man from Ohio, was happy to show off their pride and joy. Standing next to the massive bomber, Weber felt like an ant beside an elephant. The aircraft was even larger than it had appeared from below. Each engine was bigger than his entire Messerschmitt. The pressurized cabin was spacious and comfortable, with padded seats and heating systems. The remote gun turrets moved smoothly at the touch of a button. Everything was built with precision and materials that Germany had never possessed. "We built over 3,000 of these," the sergeant said proudly. "Started production in 1943. Most of them went to the Pacific to fight Japan, but we sent a few over here near the end." 3,000. Weber's mind reeled. Germany had built maybe 300 fighters in the entire final year of the war, using scrap metal and slave labor. The Americans had been mass-producing technological marvels while German factories struggled to find basic materials. Weber returned to his destroyed hometown, carrying more than just his belongings. He carried the knowledge that his nation had been blind to reality. In the years that followed, he became a voice of hard truth among German veterans. When younger men spoke of heroic defeats and stab-in-the-back theories, Weber would shake his head and tell them about the Silver Bombers. "We were not betrayed," he would say. "We were simply outclassed by people we had been taught to despise. The Americans did not win because they were lucky or because we were stabbed in the back. They won because they built better machines and told themselves fewer lies." Weber lived to see Germany rebuild, this time with honest assessments of foreign capabilities rather than propaganda. He often wondered how different history might have been if German leaders had seen one B-29 Superfortress before the war began, instead of believing their own myths about American weakness. The Silver Bombers had taught him the most important lesson of his life. Never underestimate an enemy, and never trust leaders who promise easy victories based on wishful thinking rather than facts.